At 9:47 local time in the narrowest stretch of the Strait of Hormuz, two United States Navy warships entered a corridor that 20% of the world's daily oil passes through. The water beneath their hulls was, according to Iranian state media, seeded with naval mines capable of breaking a tanker in half. One detonation in this lane would spike global crude prices within 90 seconds and strand 17 million barrels of daily shipping behind a wall of fire and debris. The ships did not slow. They did not request clearance. They moved at transit speed in full daylight, broadcasting their position to every satellite tracking their path, and the radio channel stayed silent. Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from and click subscribe. For weeks, the world had been told that this 21-mile-wide choke point between Iran and Oman was effectively closed. Iranian officials had stated that any vessel attempting passage without coordination risked striking submerged explosives whose locations only Iranian forces knew. That single sentence carried trillions of dollars of consequence. A confirmed mining of the strait would shut down crude flow to refineries in China, Japan, South Korea, India, and across Europe within a week. Gasoline prices in countries that have never heard the word Hormuz would climb within days. Insurance underwriters in London would suspend coverage on tankers, and shipping companies would reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 15 to 20 days and millions of dollars to every delivery. The threat did not need to be real to be effective. It only needed to be believed. What happened this morning tested the belief. To understand the weight of the moment, picture the strait itself. If you look at a map, the Persian Gulf empties into the Gulf of Oman through a passage shaped like a funnel, turned sideways. At its tightest point, the navigable shipping lane is only 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a 2-mile buffer. That is narrower than most international airports are long. Into that ribbon of water flows roughly 1/5 of all petroleum consumed on the planet every day without pause. 18 million barrels of crude on a normal day, roughly 7,000 vessels per year. A single tanker carrying 2 million barrels of oil represents, depending on the spot price, between $100 and $200 million of cargo. You multiply that by the number of hulls in transit at any given hour, and the dollar figure floating through that funnel is staggering. Now imagine all of it stopped. Now picture what Iran said it had done. A naval mine in its simplest form is a buoyant explosive tethered to the seabed, designed to drift just below the surface, where a ship's hull will brush against its trigger horns. Think of it as an underwater landmine that floats. Once deployed, even the people who placed it cannot always find it again. Currents shift, tethers slip, mapping fails. That is the central problem with mines, and it is the problem at the heart of what unfolded today. In an interview dated April 9th, an Iranian deputy foreign minister described the strait as open for navigation, but technically restricted. What he said, wartime conditions required vessels to coordinate with Iranian military contact points before transit. He emphasized the narrowness of the passage, the sensitivity of the waters, and the special caution needed to protect tankers. He implied that Iran knew where the mines were and that ships could pass safely if they followed Iranian procedures. The message decoded was simple. The strait belongs to us. Ask permission or take the risk. That permission was not granted today, and the risk did not arrive. At approximately the same hour the warships entered the strait, satellite-based vessel tracking picked them up, moving from east to west. Independent maritime monitoring services logged their course, speed, and bearing in real time. The transit took several hours in full daylight with visibility measured in miles. And both ships entered the Persian Gulf, conducted whatever business their orders required, and then turned and exited through the same lane they had used coming in. At no point did Iranian naval forces attempt to intercept them. At no point did either ship deviate to avoid an explosive hazard. At no point did either crew issue a distress call. If you look at the timing, you will notice something deliberate. This was not a midnight dash through hostile water. This was a daytime parade. The choice of hour eliminates the possibility of a stealth operation. The choice of route eliminates the possibility of accident. The ships were seen, were tracked, were photographed by commercial satellites, and were broadcast across open-source intelligence networks within minutes. Whoever ordered this transit wanted it observed. Iranian state-aligned media offered a different account. One outlet reported that the American ships had attempted entry and had been forced to turn back after a radio warning from Iranian naval forces. The transmission, as reported, instructed the warship to alter course and return to the Indian Ocean with a threat of being targeted if the order was disobeyed. The American response identified the vessel as a coalition warship engaged in lawful transit passage under International Maritime Convention. The exchange ended there in the Iranian account. The ships in that telling did not enter, but the same outlet has been accused multiple times in recent weeks of broadcasting claims that did not survive verification. And in this case, the satellite record contradicted the broadcast directly. The ships did enter. The ships did transit. The ships did exit. The radio exchange may have happened. The compliance did not. U.S. officials confirmed the passage and added one detail that reframed the entire event. The transit was not coordinated with Iran in advance. There was no clearance, no permission, no quiet diplomatic arrangement. The ships entered independently and exited independently, treating the Strait of Hormuz exactly as international maritime law treats it, as a transit corridor open to all flagged vessels of all nations. The exact mission of the two warships remains unconfirmed. Three possibilities sit on the table. The first is demonstration. A naval transit through contested water is one of the oldest signals in maritime statecraft. By moving warships through a passage another power has claimed to control, a navy asserts that it does not recognize the claim. The act is the message, the fuel burned, the radar emitted, the wake left behind. All of it functions as a single sentence written in steel and salt water. The sentence reads, "You do not own this water." International maritime law calls this freedom of navigation, the principle that warships of any nation may transit international straits without seeking the permission of the coastal state. The principle exists on paper. The exercise of it is what makes it real. The second possibility is escort. Commercial tankers continue to move through the strait, and many of them are now reportedly bound for American ports to load crude. Two warships moving east to west and then west to east could be conducting close protection of merchant traffic during a period of elevated risk. The third possibility is preparation. Mine clearing requires specialized vessels, but it also requires pre-survey work, hydrographic mapping, and the establishment of safe transit lanes. The two warships involved today are not believed to carry dedicated mine countermeasure equipment, which makes this explanation the least clean. But preparation rarely arrives in a single ship. It arrives in waves, with the most visible asset moving first. None of these explanations have been officially confirmed. What has been confirmed is the absence of resistance. Now layer in the second pressure point. While the warships were transiting, a separate event was unfolding more than 1,000 miles away in Pakistan, where an Iranian delegation of approximately 70 representatives had arrived for diplomatic negotiations with the United States. 70 is not a token number. A delegation of that size signals comprehensive engagement with subgroups dedicated to economic discussions, security frameworks, and political arrangements. Some members are reportedly connected to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which means military perspectives are present at the table, not waiting outside the door. If you look at the sequencing, you will notice another deliberate choice. The Iranian delegation arrived in Pakistan before the American delegation landed. In diplomatic protocol, the side that arrives first is the side that wants the meeting to happen. The Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, arrived shortly after, met first with Pakistani officials, and then proceeded into the negotiation sessions with the Iranian team. This is the same Iran that weeks earlier had publicly threatened to walk away from talks entirely. Iranian officials had stated that they would not return to the table unless two conditions were met. The first was American pressure on Israel to agree to a ceasefire arrangement involving Lebanon. The second was the release of frozen Iranian financial assets held in foreign banks. Neither condition has been met. There is no confirmed ceasefire in Lebanon. Strikes there reportedly continue. American officials have stated that no agreement was made to release frozen funds and no such release has occurred, and yet the 70-person delegation arrived early. The contrast between the public posture and the operational behavior is the central irony of this moment. On the water, Iran's claimed blockade was tested and did not hold. At the negotiating table, Iran's stated preconditions were ignored and the delegation came anyway. Both events happened on the same day. Both events point to the same shift in leverage. To understand why, return to the mines. If they exist as described, they represent Iran's most powerful, non-nuclear deterrent in the region. The ability to credibly threaten the closure of the Strait of Hormuz translates directly into negotiating power because every major economy on Earth has a financial stake in keeping that water open. But the mines only function as leverage if the threat is believed, and the threat is only believed if no one is willing to test it. Today, someone tested it. A recent report from the New York Times raised a question that quietly destabilizes the entire Iranian position. According to that reporting, Iranian forces themselves may not be able to locate the mines they reportedly placed in the strait. The implications branch in two directions. Either the mapping was never created with sufficient precision, or the personnel responsible for the deployment are no longer available to consult. Reports of casualties among military operators during previous strikes raise the possibility that operational knowledge was lost with them. A mine without a map is not a weapon. It is a hazard to everyone, including the side that placed it. The strait is not vast. The minefield, if it exists, would have to be precisely cataloged for any vessel to pass safely. Without that catalog, the lane belongs to no one. A second theory is more austere. It holds that the mines may never have existed in the strait at all. Under this reading, the public statements about mining were psychological warfare, a deterrent built entirely from announcement designed to discourage commercial traffic without the cost or risk of actual deployment. There is no verified evidence to confirm the theory. It remains speculation, but it is the kind of speculation that grows louder every hour the strait stays open. Statements attributed to American leadership add a third element. The former president recently stated that Iran's primary regional leverage rests on the perceived threat of naval mines, and that many of Iran's mine-laying capabilities have already been neutralized or destroyed. He framed the clearing of the Strait of Hormuz as a service not only to American interests but to global trading partners, naming China, Japan, South Korea, France, Germany, and others whose economies depend on the uninterrupted flow of crude through that corridor. The framing is significant. It treats the strait as a global commons that the United States is reopening on behalf of the world, rather than as Iranian territory the United States is violating. Iran had previously suggested it could limit traffic through the strait to roughly 15 vessels per day. Current traffic is reportedly near or below that figure, which means the cap has not yet been tested at scale. But the threshold matters. If commercial throughput climbs above 15 vessels and Iran does not respond, the cap dissolves. If Iran does respond, the response itself becomes the next test. Either outcome reduces leverage. Meanwhile, a separate development is reshaping the air picture, which reports indicate that China is preparing to supply Iran with new air defense systems, including portable anti-aircraft weapons known as man-portable air defense systems, or manpads. Think of a manpad as a shoulder-fired missile, small enough for one operator to carry and powerful enough to bring down a low-flying aircraft. They are cheap relative to the assets they target, easy to hide and difficult to counter once deployed in numbers. If the ceasefire framework collapses and hostilities resume, the introduction of man-pads into Iranian inventories would change the calculus of any low-altitude operation in the region. Intelligence assessments reportedly link similar systems to recent aircraft losses elsewhere in the region, which raises their strategic weight beyond their unit cost. What a weapon that costs $40,000 and can down an aircraft worth $50 million rewrites every airframe's risk profile the moment it appears in inventory. That is the broader board. Warships moving through claimed minefields without resistance, a 70-person delegation arriving early to talks whose preconditions were never met, mines that may not exist or may exist but cannot be found, air defense systems en route from a third party, commercial tankers continuing to load crude bound for American ports. Inside the negotiation rooms in Pakistan, discussions have reportedly been ongoing for several hours behind closed doors. The size of the Iranian team suggests preparation for a long process across multiple files, not a quick exit. The continued participation, despite unmet preconditions, what suggests one of three readings: Iran may have decided that escalation costs more than concession. Iran may be using talks as a delaying tactic while pressure is applied elsewhere. Or Iran's earlier conditions may have been opening positions designed to be softened rather than firm requirements. There is also the possibility that Iran's relationships with regional allied groups are under strain, particularly as ongoing conflicts continue and expectations from proxy forces shift in real time. As of this hour, the negotiations remain in progress and no official outcomes have been announced. What is not consistent with that behavior is the public claim of a sealed strait. Returned to the water, 2 warships in daylight in full view of every satellite passing overhead transited a passage that was supposed to kill them. They did not slow. They did not request clearance. They did not meet resistance. And when they exited the way they came, the silence on the radio said more than any official statement could. The ship's wakes closed behind them. The lane returned to silence. The world had its answer. If the mines were there, they did not detonate. If the mines were never there, the bluff is now visible. If the mines existed but cannot be located, the deterrent has become a liability, threatening Iranian commerce as much as anyone else's. None of those outcomes favors the position Iran walked into the negotiating room with. A single transit does not end a conflict. It does not resolve a war. It does not settle the question of what comes next in Lebanon, in Gaza, or in the broader regional contest. But it does answer one specific question that has been sitting unanswered for weeks: the question of whether the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Today in daylight, with the world watching, the answer was given without a single shot being fired. Analysts often look beyond immediate events into deeper historical layers to understand Iranian strategy. The Islamic Revolution of 1979 reshaped Iran's relationship with the West. The patterns reach further back into the 19th century Qajar dynasty, whose territorial concessions continue to influence how modern Iranian leadership interprets sovereignty and external pressure. The strait is not just a shipping lane in this reading. It is the modern expression of a centuries-old struggle over who controls the threshold between Iranian water and the world beyond it. Yet that threshold was crossed today twice by 2 ships that did not ask. 20% of the world's daily oil moves through a corridor narrower than the runway of a major international airport. This morning, 2 warships moved through it without permission and nothing happened. That is the entire story, and that is why everything that comes next in Pakistan, in Lebanon, in the Persian Gulf will be measured against the silence of a radio that should have spoken and the explosion of a mine that never came.